This is the 8th devlog for Blast Processed, my first-person platformer built around rocket jumping and the community-made jump maps of Team Fortress 2. This is also the last devlog I'll be releasing before the game releases in early access, which means that Blast Processed is now a fully playable game with all the initial early access content implemented. I'm happy to say that the game will release for free in about a month from this video's release, on June 20th, 2025. If you haven't yet, you can wishlist the game through Steam to be notified on the day the game releases, though I'll also be publishing a release trailer on the day of release for those who are subscribed to this channel. But for now, I'll be going over all the work I've done in the past 6 months to reach this fully playable state, as well as what work I've done on polishing the game for this important release. So let's get into that. Starting with some important but dull technical features, a seemingly minor but still very important addition to make to the game was input rebinding. While the default input settings have fit the preferences of all my testers, I obviously can't expect them to fit everyone's preferences, so I created the most flexible system for rebinding I could think of. I tried to avoid putting arbitrary restrictions on what inputs can be bound to what actions, which means there are no restrictions on binding one key to multiple actions, or on how many inputs can be bound to a single action. Individual bindings can be applied or removed from specific actions for maximum flexibility, with only a few minor restrictions, like not being able to bind escape since it's reserved for pausing. I'm not totally married to this approach, so if further restrictions are shown to be necessary, I'll be fine implementing them, but for now this system works great. Another input-related feature I've added is gamepad support. I want to make clear that playing the game with a gamepad is something I absolutely do not recommend, as the freedom of input allowed by using a mouse to look is much better for this sort of game. Regardless of this, it should still be an option, since some people may be playing on devices like the Steam Deck, which I've verified runs the game perfectly well through Proton. I've made sure that every map is at least possible with a gamepad, though how feasible it is for a first-time player to play through the game with a gamepad while learning advanced movement techniques is something I can't really plan for. The opening splash screen notes that playing with a keyboard and mouse is highly recommended, and past that, I've just provided plenty of support through customization options to allow gamepads to be usable, even if they'll never be ideal for this sort of game. Now let's get into some more interesting features, the first of which is something that I surprisingly wasn't planning on implementing until after the last devlog. What I've learned from watching my friends playtest the game is that some players won't want to complete entire maps in one sitting, which is an option that can be seamlessly implemented with my introduction of checkpoints. Checkpoints were mainly added for the sake of streamlining reset binds when compared to TF2 jump servers, but now the game also saves which checkpoints a player has ever reached across all of their play sessions on each map, and these checkpoints can now be instantly teleported to from any point in the map through the pause menu. Since my replay system doesn't take these teleportations into account, using this menu completely disables replay recording until the player completely restarts the map with the dedicated button in the pause menu, which also means you'll be unable to set new times when using this option. Although I added this mainly as an accessibility feature for new players who want to continue where they left off on maps across multiple sessions, it should also have some limited use for practicing later parts of a map for speedrunning. Speaking of speedrunning, another important part of this game's design is rewarding speedrunning. I'm designing Blast Process to be an enjoyable and mechanically deep game for speedrunning, and while I'm happy with the mechanical design of the game to this end, I decided that I need a more interesting onboarding process that actually incentivizes speedrunning for new players. Now, every map has 3 target times that award bronze, silver, and gold medals, each of which will also come with Steam achievements for achieving their respective times for each map. While the leaderboards I have planned for a later early access update will provide even more incentive to do speedruns, this medal system is a good baseline that doesn't require any online features. The other major incentive for speedrunning is the entire replay system, which has gone through a major overhaul since my initial implementation from over a year ago. While the structure of replay files has remained the same, practically everything to do with how the game reads those files has been improved for the sake of implementing some important features. The game's replay files are made up of solely input and view angle data, and my initial implementation of replays simply fed that data into the existing player node to play back the inputs in real time. While this worked perfectly fine for viewing replays, there are 2 features that either greatly benefit from or practically require a different approach. Firstly, a feature that I've promised multiple times at this point is racing against a replay as a ghost, which is something that would function perfectly fine under my basic implementation. The only downsides here would be that the load the player physics logic places on the CPU would be practically doubled when racing a ghost, since the ghost would essentially be a second player controlled by a replay, and there would also be a lot of refactoring to do, since my player controller assumes that only one player node exists at any given time. I'm not too worried about the performance hit, since the game's CPU usage is already fairly low, and the refactoring would only save me time and probably some frustration. But the real reason I overhauled replay playback is for the sake of implementing replay scrubbing. The big problem with my initial implementation was that the process of determining the game state of each tick is partially dependent on the state of the previous tick, which means that a replay must be viewed from the very beginning to the very end for proper playback. This renders implementing replay scrubbing, or the ability for the player to skip forward or backward in a replay, very difficult to implement. I didn't think of this feature as being a strictly necessary addition, and for a while I figured I would get around to implementing it in an update after the initial release. But after considering the development time it would save me with implementing ghosts, I decided to go ahead with this overhaul now. Now when you choose a replay to watch or race against, the game pre-computes the entire replay using the existing player node before the screen fades back into the map. As it reads from the file, variables like position, view angle, and velocity are saved into memory based on the replay playback, and the playback logic now pulls from this data instead of the input data from the replay file. This data is stored in such a way that each tick is not dependent on any previous tick, which makes implementing replay scrubbing trivially simple so long as the data for each tick is kept in memory until the player returns to the hub. It's important to note that this approach does have trade-offs, even aside from the additional memory usage, as pre-computing the replay adds loading time, since the pre-computation step involves the physics engine running as quickly as possible in the background. However, considering how much time replay scrubbing can save for players who only want to watch a specific section of a replay, and considering how low the game's memory usage is even when a replay is loaded, I think these trade-offs are definitely worth it. Of course, the other motivation behind overhauling replay reading was racing against ghosts, so now the player has the choice between watching and racing against a replay whenever one is selected to be viewed. This usually happens in the new replay menu accessed from the pause menu in the hub, which has full support for saving temporary replays and opening a replay directly from a file through a native OS file window. For now, ghost racing is somewhat bare bones, and I'm definitely willing to introduce more features throughout the early access period, but even in this state, it's already very useful for visualizing one's best time to race against, which gives a better idea of one's pace relative to their best time. And with these additions, along with a lot of very small tweaks and quality of life changes that I won't exhaustively go over, Blast Process is now a feature-complete game for the initial early access release. Now that I've gone over all the technical work, the other important work to go over is the rest of the level design that's left over from the previous devlog, which is the latter half of the 4th map Brimstone and the entirety of the 5th map. I haven't been getting consistent playtesting throughout development because my friends and testers have been even busier with school than I've been, so there's also been a lot of rebalancing to be done for the jumps I've already created. Although I was happy with the general layout of my maps and the general ideas and combinations of mechanics I explore in each individual jump, many jumps were simply unreasonable for beginners who don't have the strong muscle memory that players coming from TF2 or other source movement games will likely have. Other times, what I expected from players at a given point in the map wasn't clear to my testers, which required that I add visual elements that more clearly hinted at what I expected for that jump. I've made many small changes to each map based on this feedback, but I've made some more sweeping changes to Palace that have nothing to do with balancing. Namely, the visuals for this map have been an issue that I've wanted to fix for a while due to my concerns over performance. The game's performance hasn't dipped under 60 FPS on any map, even on my 4-year-old laptop running with AMD integrated graphics, but my liberal use of point lights in Palace still causes some performance concerns for lower-end hardware. In my efforts to improve performance, I've roughly halved the number of point lights in the map, which was made possible by changing my overall approach to lighting. Many unnecessary point lights existed throughout the map previously because I made the map's ambient lighting pitch black, which necessitated these additional lights to fully light up the environment. This gave me more fine control over how much contrast and lighting I wanted different sections of the map to have, though for the purposes of this map, I didn't really need that fine control. The ambient lighting I've landed on does give Palace darker, moodier lighting overall, but I do think this style gives the map a bit more personality with how the darker ambient lighting mixes with the orange glow of the lava pools. From a purely visual and performance standpoint, these changes are good, though I'm going to get further testing done to make sure these changes don't negatively impact the gameplay by reducing the overall clarity of the visuals. As I said before, the second half of Brimstone is also complete, which ended up being the biggest challenge in terms of level design for me because every single jump in the map incorporates syncs in some way. This is reasonable for new players because of the audio changes I've made to syncs that I discussed in the previous devlog, especially the addition of an audio cue for when a rocket is about to land. Compared to syncs in TF2, this results in a much more intuitively understandable timing window, and a generally better new player experience for this type of jump. This allowed me to push the bar for difficulty in this map past what I would be comfortable doing if I was building these maps within TF2's engine and mechanics. Though I've made sure the jumps are reasonable for new players, it's good that I was able to justify these more elaborate jumps, because making a full-length 20-jump map that consistently uses syncs in interesting ways was a real challenge for me to tackle, and it required constant evolution in complexity and difficulty over the course of the map that would likely go too far for new players without my design changes. Although Brimstone should definitely pose a challenge to new players, there's still one more map to talk about. Earlier in development, I considered making the fifth map a more significant departure from the difficulty curve established by the previous maps, since I've already introduced every major type of jump in the first 4 maps. However, I found it important to have a map that reincorporates all the skills the player has learned over the game in more difficult forms and combinations, which should provide a final comprehensive challenge that completes the game's difficulty curve in a much more satisfying way. I've decided to call this fifth map Otherworld, and the sort of visual design I've aimed for with this map goes hand in hand with my level design goals for it. Similarly to how the challenges present in this map are more difficult versions of challenges found in earlier maps, I've decided to reuse assets from those previous maps in the new context of the purple lighting and outlandish skybox. The visual design also completes my plans for the curve of visual intensity that goes along with the rising difficulty curve of each map. While I begin the game with very bright, inviting colors in the hub and paradise, each map gets progressively more intense in terms of lighting and general visuals, ending with the harsh red tones and dark textures of Brimstone, and the alien purples and chaotic mix of visual styles of Otherworld. But the real challenge of design for this game is level design and the design of the difficulty curve, and Otherworld is the climax of that difficulty curve. Earlier levels have essentially acted as introductions to certain mechanics and types of jumps, with Metropolis introducing air strafing, Palace introducing pogos, and Brimstone introducing syncs. Because these maps are more so introductions to these concepts, I've made sure that their jumps don't require overly precise execution of these techniques. So for instance, Metropolis doesn't strictly punish you for turning too fast and losing speed when air strafing, Palace doesn't require precise control of the speed of pogos, and Brimstone doesn't require max strength syncs where both rockets land on the same tick. While Otherworld doesn't demand complete perfection either, I've made sure that the jumps in this map require a greater degree of precision compared to their introductory forms in the earlier maps. I did what I could to make Otherworld feasible for new players, though the reality is that this map will probably feel like a difficulty spike to most new players. Because of this, I've tried to establish the expectation of a difficulty spike with the preceding tutorials, particularly the final tutorial that explicitly states that this map is hard. Otherworld should ideally feel like an extra challenge for dedicated players who want more past the first 4 maps, and I'm going to be experimenting with other ways to make that more clear before the game releases, but I'm also going to be making incremental nerfs to jumps across the game, including those in Otherworld during this time. So with all that work done, Blast Processed is now a content-complete game for the early access release. However, I've given myself about a month between this video's release and the game's release to make some finishing touches. Aside from further playtesting, balancing, and bug fixing I hope to get done before release, I still have some work to do on music, as Palace and Brimstone are still missing unique tracks. Additionally, I'm going to look into some more minor features and enhancements if I have the time, which should just be minor extras on top of an already fully playable game. I'd like to thank everyone who's taken the time to keep up with these devlogs over the past couple years, as the feedback and encouragement have been very helpful for keeping me motivated to finally get this game done. Since I'm not done developing Blast Processed, these devlogs are going to continue to release alongside major early access updates, so you can subscribe to the channel to keep up with those major releases. That's all I have to show for today, but I hope you'll try Blast Processed for yourself when it releases next month.